Maya had never seen a sunrise, but she could feel its warmth on her face every morning. Born without sight, she lived in a world painted with sounds, textures, and melodies. Her small apartment in downtown Chicago was filled with music, music written in Braille, recordings of classical concerts, and most importantly, an old upright piano that her grandmother had left her. At 16, Maya possessed something extraordinary that even she didn't fully understand. When her fingers touched those black and white keys, magic happened. The piano didn't just make sounds, it told stories, shared emotions, and created moments that could make grown adults cry. Her neighbors would often gather outside her apartment door just to listen when she practiced. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door would bring her coffee and sit quietly, tears streaming down her face as Maya played Beethoven. Maya's parents, David and Linda, worked double shifts to support their daughter's gift. David drove trucks during the day and cleaned offices at night. Linda worked as a nurse and took on weekend shifts whenever possible. They weren't wealthy people, but they understood that their daughter had been given something special. Every dollar they could spare went toward piano lessons, sheet music, and the dream that someday the world would hear what they heard every day in their living room. Her piano teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a retired concert pianist who had discovered Maya 3 years earlier at a community center recital. Maya had been just 13 then, playing a simple piece on an old keyboard. But even with that basic instrument, something in her performance had stopped Mrs. Patterson in her tracks. The way Maya's hands moved, the emotion in every note, it was clear this girl had been born to make music. Mrs. Patterson began teaching Maya for free, something she had never done in her 40-year career. She pushed Maya harder than any student she'd ever taught, not because she was cruel, but because she recognized genuine talent. Maya learned pieces that most adult pianists would struggle with. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Liszt, composers whose works demanded not just technical skill, but deep emotional understanding. The breakthrough came when Maya was 15. Mrs. Patterson entered her in a state competition for young musicians. Maya was nervous. She had never performed for such a large audience before. But when she sat at that grand piano and played Chopin's Minute Waltz, the entire auditorium fell silent. She won first place, and more importantly, she realized that her music could touch strangers the same way it touched her family and neighbors. Word began to spread about the blind girl who played piano like an angel. Local newspapers wrote small articles. A few videos of her performances made their way onto social media. Music schools started calling, offering scholarships. But Maya's family was careful. They had heard too many stories about young talents being exploited or pushed too hard too fast. Then came the phone call that would change everything. The Chicago Arts Foundation was hosting their annual charity gala at the Grand Ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel. It was a massive event. Celebrities, business leaders, politicians, and socialites all gathered to raise money for arts education in public schools. This year, they wanted to feature real students who had benefited from arts programs. Mrs. Patterson had submitted Maya's name and a recording of her playing. When the foundation called, they were impressed but hesitant. A blind teenager performing at such a high-profile event? What if something went wrong? What if she got nervous and made mistakes? The foundation's board debated for weeks before finally agreeing to give Maya a 10-minute slot in the program. Maya's parents were both excited and terrified. This wasn't a school recital or a community center performance. This was the big leagues. The guest list included movie stars, famous musicians, and some of the most powerful people in Chicago. One mistake, one bad performance, and Maya's reputation could be damaged before it even began. But Maya wasn't worried. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life, even if she didn't know it. She chose to perform Chopin's Ballade, No. 1 in G minor, a piece that was both technically challenging and emotionally powerful. It was nearly 10 minutes long with dramatic shifts in mood and tempo. Most importantly, it was a piece that told a story, something Maya excelled at. The weeks leading up to the gala were intense. Maya practiced for hours every day, perfecting every note, every phrase, every emotional transition. Mrs. Patterson worked with her on stage presence, helping her understand how to connect with an audience she couldn't see. They practiced walking, onto stages, finding piano benches, positioning her hands, all the things that sighted performers took for granted. Maya's parents scraped together money for a proper dress. They visited 3 different shops before finding something appropriate, elegant but not flashy, professional but still age-appropriate for a 16-year-old. Linda spent an entire week's salary on that dress, but she said it was the best money she'd ever spent. The night before the gala, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in bed running through the piece in her mind, her fingers moving silently as if she were actually playing. She thought about all the people who had believed in her. Her parents, Mrs. Patterson, her neighbors, her grandmother who had started it all by leaving her that old piano. The morning of the gala arrived gray and rainy, but Maya felt ready. She had breakfast with her parents, practiced for 2 hours, and then spent the afternoon trying to stay calm. Mrs. Patterson came over to help her get ready, fixing her hair and making sure her dress looked perfect. As they drove to the Palmer House Hotel, Maya pressed her face to the car window. She couldn't see the city passing by, but she could feel the energy, hear the sounds, smell the mix of rain and urban life. This was her city, and tonight she would represent not just herself but everyone who had ever been counted out because they were different. The Palmer House Hotel was magnificent. Maya could tell just from walking through the lobby, the way her footsteps echoed, the subtle sounds of wealth and elegance all around her. Hotel staff guided her family to a waiting area behind the ballroom where other performers were preparing. Maya could hear the crowd gathering in the main ballroom. Hundreds of voices mixing together, the clink of glasses, the sound of chairs being moved. She knew that in less than an hour she would walk onto that stage and play for an audience unlike any she had ever faced before. Her slot was scheduled for 8:30 p.m., right after dinner and before the main speaker. It was the perfect time. The audience would be relaxed from the meal but still attentive. Maya sat quietly in the green room, her parents on either side of her, Mrs. Patterson pacing nervously nearby. At 8:25, a volunteer came to get her. "Maya, it's time." Her heart started beating faster as she stood up, smoothed her dress, and took her father's arm. This was it, the moment that would either launch her career or teach her that dreams don't always come true. As they walked toward the stage entrance, Maya could hear the master of ceremonies introducing her to the crowd. She took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and prepared to show the world what music really meant. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel buzzed with the kind of energy that only comes when wealth and fame gather in one place. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen, where Chicago's elite sipped champagne, and made the kind of small talk that could launch careers or end them with a single conversation. At table 7 near the front of the room sat Hollywood's current golden boy, Jake Rivers. At 35, he had starred in 3 blockbuster action movies in the past 2 years, each one making more money than the last. His chiseled jawline and perfect smile had graced magazine covers worldwide, and his social media following numbered in the tens of millions. Tonight, he was the evening's special guest, flown in from Los Angeles specifically for this charity event. Jake wasn't at the gala because he cared deeply about arts education. His publicist had arranged the appearance as part of his image rehabilitation after a series of controversial comments during recent interviews. The charity work would show his softer side and help secure his next $100 million film contract. He sat surrounded by his usual entourage, his manager, his personal assistant, 2 bodyguards, and a handful of local business leaders who were paying premium prices just to share a table with him. The evening had started well enough. Jake had posed for photos on the red carpet, signed autographs for the wealthy donors, and delivered a brief speech about the importance of supporting young artists. But as the night wore on and the drinks flowed freely, his true personality began to show. He made jokes about the local Chicago politicians at his table, mocked the fashion choices of other guests, and generally treated the entire event as his personal entertainment. Maya and her parents had been seated at a table near the back of the room. Mrs. Patterson sat with them, nervously checking her watch and whispering words of encouragement to Maya. They had arrived early and watched as the ballroom filled with people who seemed to live in a completely different world from theirs. Maya's father, David, kept adjusting his tie, the only formal one he owned. Her mother, Linda, clutched her small purse and tried not to stare at the designer dresses and expensive jewelry around them. As the dinner service began, Maya excused herself to visit the restroom. Mrs. Patterson offered to accompany her, but Maya insisted she could manage on her own. She had been practicing navigating unfamiliar spaces, and the hotel staff had shown her the layout earlier. With her white cane in hand, she carefully made her way between the tables, moving slowly to avoid bumping into anyone. The path to the restroom required passing near Jake's table. As Maya approached, her cane accidentally tapped against one of the empty chairs that had been pulled back from a nearby table. She paused for a moment to get her bearings, not realizing that her brief stop had caught the attention of the movie star just a few feet away. Jake looked up from his conversation and noticed the teenage girl with the white cane. He had been in the middle of telling a story about his latest film stunts when Maya's presence distracted him. Without thinking about who might be listening, and fueled by the confidence that came from being constantly surrounded by people who laughed at everything he said, Jake made a comment that would change both their lives forever. Well, he said loudly enough for several nearby tables to hear. Looks like they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel for tonight's entertainment. He gestured toward Maya with his champagne glass. What's next? Are they going to have someone in a wheelchair do magic tricks? The people at his table shifted uncomfortably. His manager shot him a warning look, but Jake was just getting started. The alcohol had loosened his tongue, and the audience of wealthy donors seemed to encourage his performance. I mean, come on, he continued, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. I flew all the way from LA for this charity thing, and they're going to make us sit through some kind of pity performance? I've got better things to do than watch some kid stumble around on stage. Maya heard every word. She stood frozen between the tables, her cheeks burning with shame and anger. She had faced prejudice before, teachers who assumed she couldn't keep up, strangers who spoke too loudly as if she were also deaf, people who treated her like she was fragile or helpless. But never had someone been so cruel, so publicly dismissive of her worth as a person and as a performer. The conversations at nearby tables had stopped. Some guests stared at Jake in shock, while others looked away in embarrassment. A few people glanced sympathetically at Maya, but no one spoke up to defend her. The silence stretched on, broken only by nervous laughter from a couple of people at Jake's table who didn't know how else to react. Maya's parents, who had been watching from their table, witnessed the entire scene. David started to stand up, his face red with anger, ready to march over and confront the actor. But Linda grabbed his arm, knowing that causing a scene would only make things worse for Maya. Mrs. Patterson sat with her hands clenched in her lap, fighting back tears of rage and helplessness. Maya finally continued walking to the restroom, her steps more careful now, aware that dozens of eyes were following her movement. Inside the restroom, she locked herself in a stall and let the tears come. All her life, she had worked twice as hard as everyone else to prove that her blindness didn't define her limitations. She had spent countless hours practicing, dreaming of the day when people would see past her disability and recognize her talent. And now, minutes before the most important performance of her young life, a complete stranger had reduced her to nothing more than a charity case. When Maya returned to her table, her parents could see that she had been crying. David wanted to leave immediately. He was ready to collect their coats and walk out of the hotel, to spare his daughter any further humiliation. But Maya surprised them all with her quiet determination. "I'm not leaving," she said softly but firmly. "I came here to play piano, and that's what I'm going to do." Mrs. Patterson leaned over and squeezed Maya's hand. "Are you sure, dear? No one would blame you if you wanted to go home." Maya shook her head. "That man doesn't know me. He doesn't know what I can do. Maybe it's time someone showed him." Meanwhile, at Jake's table, the conversation had moved on to other topics, but the damage had been done. Several guests had pulled out their phones during his outburst, and some had discreetly recorded his comments. Word of the incident began spreading through the ballroom in whispers and text messages. The event organizers were alerted, and they huddled in urgent conversation about how to handle the situation. Jake remained oblivious to the growing tension around him. He continued drinking and joking with his tablemates, completely unaware that his casual cruelty had been witnessed by hundreds of people, many of whom were now questioning his character. His manager tried to get his attention, to warn him that he needed to tone down his behavior, but Jake waved him off. As the time for Maya's performance approached, an announcement was made asking guests to return to their seats. The lights dimmed slightly, and the master of ceremonies took the stage to introduce the evening's special musical performance. Maya stood up from her table, smoothed her dress, and prepared to walk into what felt like a lion's den. Jake settled, back in his chair, ready to be entertained by what he expected would be an amateur performance by someone who had no business being on a professional stage. He had no idea that the next 10 minutes would expose not Maya's limitations, but his own complete lack of understanding about what real talent looked like. The stage was set, the audience was waiting, and Maya was about to prove that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply showing the world who you really are. The master of ceremonies walked to the center of the stage, his voice echoing through the grand ballroom as he tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a very special treat for you this evening. Please welcome 16-year-old Maya Chen, who will be performing Chopin's Ballad No. 1. Maya stood up from her table, her legs feeling shaky beneath her. The walk from her seat to the stage felt like the longest journey of her life. Every step was deliberate, careful, as she navigated between tables filled with people who had just witnessed her public humiliation. Some guests watched her with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few with the kind of pity that made her stomach turn. Mrs. Patterson walked beside her, gently guiding her toward the stage steps. "Remember what we practiced," she whispered. "Feel the music first, then let your fingers follow. You've got this, sweetheart." As they reached the stage, Maya could hear the polite but uncertain applause from the audience. It wasn't the enthusiastic clapping she was used to at school concerts or community events. This felt different, colder, more skeptical. She knew that many people in that room were probably wondering the same thing Tyler had said out loud. What was a blind teenager doing performing at such an important event? The stage lights were bright and warm on her face as she carefully climbed the steps. A volunteer helped her locate the piano bench, and Maya ran her hands along the edge of the beautiful grand piano. It was a Steinway. She could tell immediately from the touch and sound of the keys as she pressed them gently. This was the kind of instrument most pianists only dreamed of playing. Maya adjusted the bench to the perfect height and placed her hands in her lap. The ballroom had grown quiet, but she could still hear the subtle sounds of a large crowd. People shifting in their chairs, the clink of glasses, whispered conversations. Somewhere out there in that sea of people sat Tyler Stone, probably smirking and waiting for her to prove his cruel words right. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. For just a moment, Maya hesitated. What if he was right? What if she really didn't belong here? What if she made a mistake and embarrassed herself in front of all these important people? The doubt crept in like a cold wind, threatening to freeze her fingers before she even began. But then Maya remembered why she was here. This wasn't about proving anything to Tyler Stone or anyone else who might doubt her. This was about the music itself, about the gift she had been given, about the countless hours she had spent falling in love with every note and phrase of this beautiful piece. Maya closed her eyes, though it made no difference to her world of permanent darkness, and found her center. She thought about her grandmother, who had first put her tiny hands on piano keys. She thought about her parents sitting in the audience who had sacrificed so much to help her reach this moment. She thought about Mrs. Patterson, who had believed in her when no one else would. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 flowed from the piano like water from a spring. Maya's hands moved with the kind of precision that comes only from years of dedicated practice. But more than that, they moved with emotion that couldn't be taught or faked. The opening melody was gentle, almost questioning, as if the music itself was asking the audience to listen with open hearts. The effect on the ballroom was immediate and profound. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People who had been reaching for their phones or checking their watches suddenly found themselves completely focused on the stage. Even the waitstaff, who had been quietly clearing tables, paused in their work to listen. Maya's interpretation of the piece was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. Where other pianists might focus on technical perfection, Maya seemed to understand something deeper about the music. Each note carried weight, each phrase told a story. Her blindness, rather than being a limitation, seemed to give her a special connection to the emotional heart of the composition. As the piece progressed, Maya's confidence grew. Her fingers danced across the keys with increasing intensity, bringing out the dramatic contrasts that made Chopin's music so powerful. The gentle, lyrical passages were like whispered secrets, while the thunderous, passionate sections filled the room with raw emotion. Tyler Stone, who had been slouching in his chair with a bored expression, gradually sat up straighter. The smirk had disappeared from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. This wasn't what he had expected at all. This wasn't some pity performance by a disabled kid trying to be inspiring. This was real music, played by someone who understood it in ways he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Around the ballroom, people were having their own moments of recognition. An elderly woman at table 12 dabbed at her eyes with her napkin, reminded of her own piano lessons from 60 years ago. A businessman who hadn't listened to classical music since college found himself completely absorbed in the performance. A young girl, the daughter of one of the donors, watched Maya with wide eyes, seeing for the first time what it meant to truly master an instrument. Maya reached the middle section of the piece, where Chopin's melody becomes more complex and emotionally intense. Her hands moved with fluid grace, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. She was no longer just playing the notes on the page. She was having a conversation with the music itself, responding to its moods and changes with instinctive understanding. The ballroom's acoustics were perfect, carrying every subtle detail of Maya's performance to the furthest corners of the room. People who had been sitting in the back rows found themselves leaning forward, not wanting to miss a single note. The usual sounds of a large gathering, coughing, chair squeaking, whispered conversations, had completely disappeared. Mrs. Patterson stood at the side of the stage, with tears streaming down her face. In all her years of teaching, she had never heard Maya play with such power and emotion. It was as if the humiliation she had endured earlier had somehow unlocked something deeper in her musical soul. Every ounce of pain, determination, and hope was flowing through her fingers into the music. Maya approached the climactic section of the piece, where Chopin's harmonies become increasingly complex and the technical demands reach their peak. This was the part that separated truly gifted pianists from merely competent ones. Her hands moved with impossible speed and precision, but never at the expense of musical expression. Every rushing scale, every dramatic chord progression, every delicate ornament was perfectly placed and beautifully voiced. The audience was completely spellbound. Some people had stopped breathing, afraid that any sound might break the magical spell that Maya was weaving. Others found themselves involuntarily moving to the rhythm, their bodies responding to music that spoke directly to their souls. Tyler's manager, who had been frantically trying to control the damage from his client's earlier comments, slowly put down his phone and simply listened. Even he, who had heard every excuse and spin in the entertainment business, could recognize something genuinely extraordinary when he encountered it. As Maya moved into the final section of the piece, her playing took on an almost otherworldly quality. The music seemed to be coming not just from the piano, but from somewhere much deeper, from her heart, her experiences, her very essence as a human being. The melody soared and danced, painting pictures that the audience could see even with their eyes closed. The conclusion of Chopin's ballade is both gentle and powerful, like the sun setting after a dramatic storm. Maya's hands moved through the final phrases with perfect control, allowing each note to ring clearly in the sudden silence. When she played the last chord, she held it for just the right amount of time before lifting her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was unlike anything anyone in that ballroom had ever experienced. It wasn't the awkward quiet of an uncomfortable moment or the polite pause before obligatory applause. It was the kind of profound silence that follows something truly transcendent, when an audience needs a moment to process what they have just witnessed. Maya sat perfectly still at the piano bench, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. She had given everything she had to that performance, pouring her heart and soul into every note. Now all she could do was wait to see if her music had reached the hearts of the people listening. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds. Maya sat at the piano, her hands still folded in her lap, waiting for some kind of response. She could feel the energy in the room, but she couldn't tell what it meant. Had she played well? Had she made mistakes? Were people disappointed or moved or just being polite? Then it started. One person began clapping, slowly at first, then another joined in. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause that was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. This wasn't the polite clapping you hear at formal events. This was raw, emotional, genuine appreciation from people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. People jumped to their feet so quickly that chairs scraped against the floor. The sound of hundreds of people applauding filled the grand ballroom, echoing off the high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. Some people were cheering, others were wiping tears from their eyes, and many were just standing there in amazement, still processing what they had just heard. Maya felt overwhelmed by the response. She had never performed for such a large audience before, and certainly never one that reacted with such intensity. Mrs. Patterson rushed onto the stage to help her stand and take a bow. As Maya rose from the piano bench, the applause somehow got even louder. "You did it, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson whispered in her ear. "You absolutely did it." Through the thunderous applause, Maya could hear individual voices. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Others were calling out things like, "amazing," and "incredible." The response was so positive, so overwhelming, that Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. But these were different tears than the ones she had cried in the bathroom earlier. These were tears of joy, relief, and validation. At table 7, Tyler Stone sat frozen in his chair while everyone around him stood and applauded. His face had gone completely pale and his hands remained in his lap, unable to join in the celebration. The performance he had just witnessed had shattered every assumption he had made about Maya, about talent, and about what really mattered in life. Tyler's manager was applauding enthusiastically, partly because he genuinely appreciated Maya's performance, but also because he knew that being seen supporting her now might help repair some of the damage from Tyler's earlier comments. The other people at their table were giving Tyler strange looks, clearly wondering why he wasn't joining in the standing ovation. Around the ballroom, the response was unlike anything the event organizers had ever seen. Business executives who usually kept their emotions carefully controlled were openly moved to tears. Society ladies who prided themselves on being sophisticated and worldly were applauding like teenagers at a rock concert. Even the hotel staff had stopped their work to listen and were now clapping along with everyone else. Dr. Williams, a renowned music professor from Northwestern University who was attending as a guest, was frantically trying to get the attention of his colleague at a nearby table. "Did you hear that interpretation of the second theme?" he shouted over the applause. "I've never heard anyone bring out those inner voices like that. She's extraordinary." Meanwhile, several record industry executives who were attending the gala were already pulling out their business cards. They had come to the event for networking and tax-deductible charity donations, but now they were witnessing the birth of what could be a major musical career. Maya's performance wasn't just technically impressive. It had the kind of emotional depth and originality that couldn't be taught or manufactured. As the applause continued, Maya took several bows, each time generating another wave of cheering. Mrs. Patterson stayed close beside her, partly to help guide her movements, but mostly because she was so proud she couldn't bear to be anywhere else. This was the moment every music teacher dreams of, seeing a student not just succeed, but truly shine on a stage they deserve to be on. In the back of the room, Maya's parents were crying openly. Her father, who had been ready to leave the hotel, earlier to spare his daughter further humiliation, now stood with his chest puffed out with pride. Her mother couldn't stop clapping, even though her hands were starting to hurt. They had always believed in their daughter's talent, but seeing hundreds of strangers respond to her music with such genuine emotion was more than they had ever dared to hope for. The applause finally began to die down, but the energy in the room remained electric. People were turning to their table mates with expressions of amazement, everyone wanting to share their reaction to what they had just experienced. Conversations broke out all over the ballroom as guests tried to process what they had witnessed. Tyler remained seated, staring at the stage where Maya was now being escorted back to her table. The cruel words he had spoken earlier kept replaying in his mind, each one now seeming more horrible than before. He had called her performance a pity show and suggested she had no business being there. Now, after hearing her play, he realized that she had more business being on that stage than he had being in that room. His manager leaned over and whispered urgently, "You need to go apologize to her. Right now. People saw what happened earlier, and if you don't make this right, it's going to destroy your career." But Tyler barely heard him. He wasn't thinking about his career or his public image. He was thinking about the fact that he had judged someone so completely wrong, so cruelly and publicly, that he had become exactly the kind of person he had always claimed to despise in his movie roles, the villain who attacks innocent people just because he can. Around the ballroom, people were already approaching Maya's table. Dr. Williams made his way over to introduce himself and express his admiration for her performance. Several other musicians in attendance wanted to meet her and talk about her training. A representative from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra was discussing the possibility of Maya performing as a guest soloist in an upcoming concert. Maya was trying to handle all the attention gracefully, but she was clearly overwhelmed. She had never been the center of so much positive attention before. People were shaking her hand, complimenting her playing, and asking about her future plans. Mrs. Patterson stayed close, helping to manage the crowd of well-wishers and making sure Maya didn't get too overwhelmed by all the attention. Meanwhile, Tyler's table had become noticeably quiet. The people sitting with him were clearly uncomfortable, not sure how to react to someone who had so publicly and wrongly attacked the evening's star performer. Some of them were already making excuses to leave early, not wanting to be associated with Tyler's behavior. Tyler's assistant was frantically checking social media on her phone, watching as videos of Maya's performance began to spread online. The hashtag #TopperMayaPiano was already trending, with people sharing clips of her playing and expressing their amazement at her talent. But mixed in with the praise for Maya were screenshots and recordings of Tyler's earlier comments, and the reaction to those was swift and brutal. "Tyler," his manager said more urgently, "we have a serious problem. Videos of what you said are going viral and the response is not good. We need to do damage control immediately." But Tyler still wasn't listening to talk about damage control or public relations. For the first time in his adult life, he was facing the reality that he had genuinely hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and that his words had revealed something ugly about his own character that he didn't want to face. As Maya finally made her way back to her family's table, the crowd of admirers following her, Tyler made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He stood up from his chair and began walking across the ballroom toward her table. His manager grabbed his arm. "What are you doing? Let me handle this. We need to craft the right message." Tyler shook him off. "No," he said quietly. "This isn't about managing my image. This is about doing what's right." The transformation happening in Tyler Stone was visible to everyone watching. The arrogant movie star who had mocked a blind teenager was being forced to confront the fact that his assumptions about people were not just wrong, but cruel and damaging. And for the first time in years, he was more concerned about making things right than about protecting his reputation. Tyler walked across the ballroom with heavy steps, each one feeling harder than the last. The closer he got to Maya's table, the more he realized just how badly he had messed up. Behind him, His manager and assistant were following at a distance, probably planning how to spin whatever was about to happen next. When Tyler reached Maya's table, the conversations around it gradually died down. People recognized him immediately, and many of them had witnessed his cruel comments earlier in the evening. The atmosphere grew tense as everyone waited to see what the famous actor would do next. Maya was sitting with her back partially to him, talking quietly with her parents about all the people who had come to congratulate her. She hadn't noticed Tyler's approach yet, but her father had. David's jaw tightened as he saw the man who had publicly humiliated his daughter now standing, just a few feet away. "Excuse me," Tyler said softly, his voice completely different from the loud, mocking tone he had used earlier. "Maya, could I speak with you for a moment?" Maya turned toward his voice, and Tyler found himself looking into the face of the young woman he had so carelessly insulted. Up close, he could see that she was even younger than he had thought, just a teenager who had probably been nervous and excited about performing until he had tried to ruin her evening. "I'm Tyler Stone," he said, then immediately felt stupid. Of course she knew who he was. Everyone in the room knew who he was, which made his earlier behavior even worse. Maya's father started to stand up, clearly ready to tell Tyler exactly what. He thought of him, but Maya gently put her hand on his arm. "It's okay, Dad," she said quietly. Then she looked in Tyler's direction and said, "I know who you are." The simple statement hit Tyler harder than any angry words could have. There was no hostility in her voice, no bitterness, just a calm acknowledgement that made him feel even smaller than he already did. "I came over because I need to apologize to you," Tyler continued, his voice getting quieter as he struggled to find the right words. "What I said earlier, there's no excuse for it. It was cruel and wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Mrs. Patterson, who had been sitting protectively next to Maya, watched Tyler carefully. She had seen plenty of fake apologies in her lifetime, usually, from students who were more sorry about getting caught than about what they had done. But something in Tyler's voice and posture suggested this might be different. "I judged you without knowing anything about you," Tyler went on, his famous confidence completely gone. "I made assumptions based on ignorance and arrogance. What you just did up there." He paused, struggling to find words that could express what he had experienced during her performance. "I've never heard anything like that in my life. You have a gift that's beyond anything I could ever understand." Maya listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Around them, other guests were pretending to have their own conversations, while obviously listening to every word of Tyler's apology. Some were pulling out their phones hoping to capture what might become another viral moment. "Thank you for apologizing," Maya said finally. "I accept it." Tyler felt a wave of relief, but Maya wasn't finished speaking. "But I want you to understand something," she continued, her voice still calm but now carrying a strength that made everyone lean in to listen. "You didn't hurt me because I'm blind. You hurt me because you decided I wasn't worth treating with respect. That has nothing to do with my eyes and everything to do with your heart." The words hit Tyler like a physical blow. He had been thinking of this as an incident where he had been insensitive about her disability. But Maya was pointing out something much deeper. He had treated her badly because he had stopped seeing other people as fully human, as deserving of basic kindness and respect. "You're absolutely right," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm sorry for that too. I'm sorry for becoming the kind of person who would say those things about anyone." Maya's mother, who had been watching the exchange with tears in her eyes, was struck by how mature and graceful her daughter was being. At 16, Maya was handling the situation with more dignity than many adults could have managed. By now, people at nearby tables had given up pretending they weren't listening. The entire section of the ballroom had gone quiet, with everyone focused on the conversation happening at Maya's table. This wasn't just a celebrity apologizing for bad behavior. This was a young woman teaching an important lesson about humanity and respect. Tyler's manager kept checking his phone, watching as videos of the apology began joining the videos of Maya's performance online. The public reaction was swift and divided. Some people were praising Tyler for apologizing publicly, while others were saying it was too little, too late. But Tyler wasn't thinking about public reaction anymore. "Is there anything I can do to make this right?" Tyler asked. "I know I can't take back what I said, but if there's anything—" Maya thought for a moment, then said something that surprised everyone, including herself. "Actually, there is something. Use your platform to help other people like me. Not because we need pity, but because we deserve the same opportunities as everyone else." Tyler nodded immediately. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you think would help." Dr. Williams, who had been standing nearby waiting to talk to Maya again, stepped forward. "If I may," he said, "there are many talented students with disabilities who never get the chance to showcase their abilities because of assumptions and barriers. Perhaps Mr. Stone could help create more opportunities for them." The idea began to take shape quickly. Tyler could use his wealth and influence to fund scholarships, create performance opportunities, and most importantly, help change people's attitudes about what people with disabilities could achieve. Maya's father, who had spent the entire conversation fighting the urge to tell Tyler exactly what he thought of him, found himself impressed despite his anger. The apology seemed genuine, and the offer to help others showed that maybe Tyler had learned something real from this experience. Over the following weeks, the videos of Maya's performance and Tyler's apology spread across the internet, reaching millions of people around the world. Maya found herself invited to perform at concert halls, offered recording contracts, and accepted to prestigious music schools. But more importantly, her story inspired countless other young people with disabilities to pursue their own dreams. Tyler kept his word. He established a foundation that provided funding and opportunities for artists with disabilities. He used his social media platforms, which reached tens of millions of people, to share stories of talented individuals who had been overlooked because of society's assumptions. He funded accessible music programs in schools and helped create scholarships for students who might not otherwise have the chance to develop their talents. The transformation wasn't easy for Tyler. He had to face the fact that his success had made him arrogant and disconnected from other people's experiences. He had to learn how to use his privilege to help others, rather than just to make himself feel important. It was humbling work, but it was also the most meaningful thing he had ever done. Maya continued her musical journey, eventually performing at Carnegie Hall and with major orchestras around the world. She never spoke publicly about the incident, with Tyler again, choosing instead to let her music speak for itself. But she often thought about that night at the Palmer House Hotel, and how sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the most important changes. The evening that had started with cruel words and public humiliation had ended with genuine apology, meaningful change, and the beginning of a movement that would create opportunities for thousands of talented individuals who had been overlooked simply because they were different. Tyler never regained his former status as Hollywood's golden boy, but he found something much more valuable: the respect that comes from using your influence to make the world a better place. And Maya had learned that sometimes the best response to ignorance isn't anger or bitterness, but simply showing the world who you really are and demanding that you be treated with the respect that every human being deserves. Their story became a reminder that talent has no boundaries, that assumptions about others often reveal our own limitations, and that it's never too late to choose kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and hope over despair.